Hello! Before we actually get started, I do want to say if you are watching this on its actual release, then tonight at about 8 p.m. EST, I will be returning to VTuber Vault for the first time. My first guest will be Rhea, a good friend of mine. Most of the rest of this video will be a bit short on visuals, so if you just want to relax and have this in the background to hear a couple stories from the land of Cincope, then feel free to have this on in the background and enjoy the rest of what I have to tell you. With Halloween just around the corner, I figured that it would be a good time to tell about some of the more horrific, I suppose, for lack of a better term, portions of Syncope from various lands. We will, of course, be starting off with the prime example of horrific things that happen. The land of 1,000 deaths. The land that even the plants want you dead in. The Eastern Lands. Or, as it is spoken in several dialects of the native serpentine races of Shahasira. There are many different creatures that all want you dead over there, including, as I established, the very plants that coat the entirety of the jungle continent. But I figured that I would start off with something a little less overtly horrific, though in its own right, probably among the more horrific things. The sky jellies. Seemingly just a few mundane creatures that aren't overtly predatory, like the namesake jellyfish that they are related to. They do not have a brain. They don't exactly overtly hunt. They merely drift along and wind up grabbing anything that winds up passing through their tendrils. The key point in them is that where they are a very diverse set of species, much like jellyfish of our world are, ranging from standard jellies to man-o-war type groups of life forms that all decide to unite into one being. They are much larger, the average size of them being more akin to a hot air balloon in some species, as opposed to our world where they are smaller than your average grocery bag. As such, their tentacles are also about the size of a rope rather than the shoelace at maximum that they tend to be in our world. And as that winds up going up, so do the size of their barbs. Depending on the size and species of sky jelly that you wind up encountering, the barbs can range from the size of a taser's barb all the way up to a small stiletto dagger. And that doesn't mean that it follows scorpion logic, where they wind up becoming less potent as they get larger. Obviously, them not having all the water to help them, they have to, A, wind up killing whatever they are getting rather quickly, but they also need to quickly make it to where it is not going to get out. So each of their barbs has a dual purpose. It has the injection, of which their toxins tend to be of the more liquefying nature. They melt the creatures that get injected with them from the inside out, and then the tendrils have a reverse function where the hollow tubes then start pulling out the liquid goop that winds up being created as a result. Which does lead to frequent areas where the winds drift sky jellies to having less than inviting aura about them, as the trees wind up being draped with sacks of bone and skin, as all of the actual flesh and tendons and the like have wound up being sucked out and have left only the bones and the skin. A horrific sight to be sure, but if you don't see sky jellies around, at the very least you know that you don't have to worry. Or do you? They are still very translucent, so if you happen to see something shimmering in the light, probably best to avoid that. For all you know, you could wind up draping the trees the same as your average monkey or lizard might have before you. Traveling out from the eastern lands, obviously you have the great beasts of the ocean. The ocean itself is already horrifying enough to many people. However, most of us only have to worry about things like sharks or whatever comes from our imagination. Even in our reality, the colossal and giant squids wind up staying very, very, very down below, and have been documented to be very docile. The seas of Cincope are more akin to our ancient oceans than they are to our current oceans, in that many creatures wind up being quite aggressive and predatory. Some of the more prominent creatures that were discovered in the Legends era are things such as the Sea King, a very pale deep sea creature that has a very humanoid looking upper portion, though exclusively with tendrils, almost like a woman in a wedding dress, I suppose, is the best way to describe their appearance, though where the veil winds up coming loose, there is not a face there, but is merely the toothy maw that meets you if you happen to be unlucky enough to not be in a position to fight back and win. Another of the large creatures that inhabits the ocean is a as of yet unnamed creature. Large enough to take down entire ships. This creature has evolved potentially through portal intervention, as it has both fish-like attributes as well as reptilian attributes. Its body is that of a mosasaur sort of shape, though its head winds up taking a more domed shape, though with a relatively quickly tapering cutting edge on the front of it, reinforced with bone, similar to a Dunkleosteus if you were to put an axe on the front of its head. And even toward the back, it is a more standardized fish-like fluked tail, complete with spines and webbing, rather than what you would expect from any of the species previously mentioned. Quite possibly the least threatening portion of the entire creature. It is very large, about the size of your average galleon, and very, very territorial. It is also known to wind up being quite the horrific incident for any individuals that wind up being brought into it, as obviously, with the size that it is, most people do not tend to get chewed. They do not meet a death before they wind up being swallowed by this creature. Instead, they spend days and possibly even weeks, depending on the constitution and the like of the creature, slowly being digested. Occasionally being relieved from the searing pain, but in their own right, only as they have to fight for breath as a wash of water has come through the creature until it is evacuated. It is a horrific way to die, no matter how you wind up dying from said creature. Though, at the very least, that is going to wind up with an end at some point. If we move into the future and we do look at the Niphanese, it does take us a bit back into the Eastern lands, however, below the surface. Sometime in the middling era of Cincope's history, several Niphanese splinter groups decided that they were going to take advantage of the increase in technology and built relatively large underground complexes in the Eastern lands, experimenting on various creatures over in that area, including the native serpentine races, creating something akin to servitors, though without the mercy of having a chance of your sentience being stripped away. They were merely crudely bolted on with cybernetics and had their brains taken over. The consciousness is still within them, and due to the nature of everything, they are also viewing themselves as abominations the entire way through, as their culture is utterly disgraced by the addition of the cybernetics that purifies their bodies and makes them an example of weakness in their own eyes. But they cannot do anything about that. They have none of their faculties. They are merely stuck within that metal shell of their own, watching as their own flesh migrates and moves, going through various tests, and constantly being added to. They no longer have control of their mouth. They are, in a sense, having no mouth, but feeling every need to scream. Unfortunately, their lack of ability to move their own body does not mean that they are separated from their nerves. Every crude surgery, every rough addition of metal and wood and tubes and plastic is still felt by them. They are trapped in the prison of their own mind and forced to deal with what their body has become around them. Many of these underground bunkers created by the Niphanese did wind up dying as a result of the opening of the Well of Souls. However, not all of them were within the radius of it. Some of them survived to the modern era, and occasionally a member of either a Niphanese expeditionary group or someone from the Godland stumbles upon the entrance to one of them. And, depending on, winds up finding the true horrors that lie beneath. Either with the added disconnect of not being associated with it or seeing the horrors that their forebears wound up creating. Though the Godlands themselves are not exactly immune to such horrors being brought upon them, theirs are normally of a more supernatural nature, unexpected from those that turned their back on magic and the like relatively quickly into the transition period between the Legends era and the modern era. Vile necromantic experiments that never quite turned out the way that they were intended to. Everything from those being brought back, stuck within their own mind, similar to the aforementioned cybernetic experiments, to those that thought that they could create immortality, and in the end wound up being stuck as an unmoving skull until they managed to, over years of meditation and thought, be puppeted around by suits of rat armor. But I suppose that not many things wind up matching what came before. Aside from perhaps some of the cruelty that happened in soon to be referred to as a prison system. Because for those that don't know, the prison system is an agreement that was made between the kingdoms of the Dark Elves and the primary ruling bodies of the Godlands in order to stop the ratings. The ratings didn't entirely stop, as not all of the Dark Elf kingdoms were part of one hegemony, unlike the Godlands. However, the primary ones did stop. But for those that were brought in to the prison system prior to it being a prison system, they were subjected to quite the array of torture. Those that were lucky wound up dying from pain and shock as a result of the experiments brought upon them. And luckily, it was not crude augmetics put on. Unfortunately, it was cruel magic experiments. Those that were formed into whatever shape they were needed to be the most obedient workers possible, or just for the experimentation and joy of those that brought them down. Whether you become a large hulking creature with your consciousness subdued via magic restraints in order to continue to dig more tunnels for the ever-expanding kingdom of the Dark Elves that you happened to be brought in by, or you were turned into various masses of slug-like creatures, valued for the slime that you produced, both attracting several delicacies of the Dark Elves, or forming various mosses and mushrooms as a result of the nutrients that you produced in order to provide for the alchemical needs of your new masters. If you were unlucky enough to be in the first department, you would constantly be kept alive, thankfully, because you are all too valuable for those that are high enough up to be enjoying such delicacies that you attract. Unfortunately, what you are winding up attracting are very predatory, very parasitic creatures, not unlike our tarantula hawk wasps in the lightest of cases. Luckily, you're unlikely to be eaten from the inside out. Unluckily, you will still feel the wriggling and writhing beneath your skin, because it is not the eggs that they want. It is the larva that they want. You will be magically brought back to your full form afterward, but not before you spend several days fattening up those new hang-ons in your body with your own body. They do not care for your well-being as far as extracting them, though. And it is quite a bit easier to deal with such parasites, as they are still able to be quite hostile and predatory even in their larval stage. It is easier to kill them before bringing them out. So very large corkscrew-like devices with prongs are driven into the holes and driven in until they meet with the flesh of the creature. Where, if you're lucky, it wound up meeting with the head. If you are unlucky, you are now going to feel as the pronged head of the larva scrapes all the way out through the hole that they came through until they are brought out, writhing and screaming, and then killed in order to actually be delivered to those that desire for their succulent flesh. You will, luckily, shortly afterward, be healed back and have a little bit of breathing room afterward before the cycle starts again to enjoy your once again whole body. But the breeding cycle of these creatures is very, very fast. So it will only be days until the cycle starts all over. And then, eventually, you all meet the same fate. The species has to stay alive for the delicacies to continue. Unfortunately for you, that means that you will inevitably wind up being replaced by a new sluggy beast that was once some poor, innocent, sentient creature. And you will go through the full process of such a tarantula hawk-esque delivery. You will feel them writhing and squirming inside of you, slowly eating you, until they reach your brain. As the rest of your body isn't exactly needed in your new form for your brain to stay, well, active. If you're lucky, you will wind up having them go through your brain. If you are unlucky, you just have to wait until natural causes wind up finishing you off after they burst out from your now limp husk and fly off and go to grow and cause such suffering to be experienced by your other unfortunate prison mates. I'd hesitate to say cellmates. You're not exactly left in cells. Free roam is ever much more delicious after all, but the prison of one's own mind is always so much worse than any prison that can be constructed by mortal hands. That being said, I suppose that 3 stories is probably enough for all of you. And that being said, I hope you enjoyed some of these stories of me fleshing out a bit more of Syncope's lore in the more spooky theme for the month. If you have any critiques or anything, I'm always open to hearing about it. I'm a bit of a world builder. I'm not very good at telling stories directly. That's not a skill set that I've quite developed yet. So I'm always open to hearing some constructive criticism in regards to how I can improve these stories in the future. For those that have stayed along for this entire video, I do thank you deeply, and I hope that you enjoyed. I, for what it's worth, enjoyed coming up with these stories, and I'm glad that I could share parts of my world with you. And as always, thank you all so much for watching. Leave a like if you liked, subscribe to become part of the Eggplant Patch, and I will see you guys next time. Love you all. Bye.